All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here on another edition of our Franchise Your Business podcast series. My name is Tom Dufour. I'm the founder and CEO of Big Sky Franchise Team. And as folks are starting to load into the session here, just want to take a quick moment to thank you all for being here. And if you have not subscribed to our podcast channel through your favorite podcast service, Apple, Spotify, whatever it might be, please check us out at Franchise Your Business and subscribe to our second podcast called Multiply Your Success. We're fast approaching 250 episodes, and we'd love for you to subscribe and hear what we've got, some of the great activity we have going on there. And if you'd like to see it all in one place, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, Big Sky Franchise Team. That's Big Sky Franchise Team on YouTube. Just search for us there. We have roughly 600 podcast webinars, educational sessions, and other great video content made available for you there. Now, for all of you that are joining us today, I'd just like to say and welcome our guest for us today, who is Brad Shipe with Shipe Dosik Law. And really the purpose of this is we're in the thick of renewal season for franchising and for updating and renewing your FDD. So if you're a franchisor out there and your fiscal year ends December 31st, which most companies do, and most franchisors I know, their fiscal year end is on the 31st of December. This session's for you out there. Now, I'll give a little background on Brad, and I've had the good fortune of knowing Brad for many, many years and have worked with his law firm for many years and referred many clients to him and have had many clients that just continue to give high regard and high remarks to the quality of service they receive from them. Brad is a partner with Shipe Dosik Law, which is based in Atlanta, and they specialize specifically in franchising. And while most of their practice represents franchisors, he's had the opportunity to work with both franchisors and franchisees in all phases of their relationship, including negotiating and preparing the franchise agreement, addenda, offering counsel on transfers and terminations, and representing clients in lawsuits, arbitrations, and mediations. And Brad has been recognized as a legal eagle, which is a designation and given by the Franchise Times. So with that, Brad, I'd love to just turn things over to you and just start this conversation about updating the FDD, and let's just talk about it a little bit here.
Sure. Thanks, Tom. So we're at the time of year where most of our franchise clients are getting ready to prepare their 2025 FDDs. As you mentioned, they're based on the fiscal year, and for the most part, FDDs are due to be updated. Let me rephrase that. Most of the time, FDDs go stale within 120 days after the end of the fiscal year. So for, again, most franchisors, the fiscal year ends on December 31st, meaning they need to update their FDD by the end of April if they want to keep selling franchises. There's a couple of little, depending on where the franchise or is registered, there's some changes to that. Like California, it's 110 days after the fiscal year, and Hawaii, it's 3 months. So if you are registered in those states, you need to be even quicker.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. Well, I'd love for you to just from a let's just say a kind of more of a high level. So you mentioned there it's within the 120 days of the fiscal year end for most, outside of those exceptions you mentioned. Why is this important? I mean, why does a franchisor even have to do this? Sometimes clients we both work with, they're new to franchising, they get their FDD. Now the year passes, they say, wait a minute, what is this all about? Where maybe they forgot about what you're supposed to do for these renewals. So why is this in place? What's the significance of it?
Well, the most significant part is that it's the law. It's dictated.
And by the way, that's a pretty good reason.
Yes. The biggest one being the FTC has a franchise rule, and the statutes are that you have to keep this updated. Keep in mind, a franchise disclosure document is in many respects a sales prospectus, and the law is in place to make sure that that perspective is kept current, that it doesn't contain old information, and that when a franchise prospect is reading this, it's reading it based on the most current information available.
Perfect. And for someone that's coming in, so I always think it's interesting. Let's look at this from two facets and kind of go in two directions here for the conversation I think would be important. And by the way, for anybody that's tuning in live, feel free to type any questions that you might have into the chat box or into the Q&A, or hit the raise hand feature. And we've got a close-knit enough group here that I can unmute you if you just want to ask the question directly, if you'd like to do that. But what I'm thinking here, Brad, for the course of the conversation, what if I'd like to have you go one direction in terms of some of the requirements. What's required for the update? What are the things that need to be done to make it happen? And then I'd like to talk a little bit about on the franchise sales end. How does this impact your franchise sales when you update or don't update, or renew or don't renew, and all of the things there? So let's start with some of these requirements. What's required to get this update going, and what does that generally look like?
Well, again, for the most part, it's a matter of updating the information that's in there. Some of the key things that to keep in mind are uh, if there's new officers, directors, you'd want to update item two. That you have new sales managers, that would be the sort of thing that would be updated. Litigation, if there's any changes to your fees, franchisors may want to raise certain fees. That would be the time to do it. Item seven includes the initial estimate of cost to get for a franchisee to get their business up and running. And especially over the last few years with inflation, some of those costs may go up. And again, the point being to keep that information current. You have other items.
So Brad, I'll interrupt there for a second. Speaking specifically on the investment chart on item 7. So I know you mentioned inflation and things. So just to dig in on that a little bit, what do you generally recommend to your clients when they start looking at item 7? Are there specific categories that you generally see this look at? Do you have them examine the entire document, kind of just really do a refresh to say, maybe it's been a few years since you priced everything out. Do you need to go back and do that? How do you suggest that happens?
Really, I do think that franchisors should be looking at this, looking at everything and doing a refresh. A good idea for franchisors, as their franchisees are building out their units or getting them up and running, is to have those franchisees provide the information so that you can make sure that you are keeping up-to-date numbers. Just as an example, if if we're finding out that build-out costs for a restaurant, those are an item that have greatly gone up over the last several years. If a franchisor is asking its franchisees through the year, what have your costs been? It's easy to review those numbers and say, hey, we need to change that number. But really, it should, specifically as to item 7, all those numbers should at least be looked at, not just to make sure they're updated, but certainly there's a possibility that a number may have just been things may have just been underestimated for the prior year. So make sure we get the most accurate information for prospective franchisees as we can.
Okay. Yeah. And well, that makes me think too. I recently spoke with a client who was going through this the renewal process, and said when he was going through his item 7, what he found was he had overestimated the initial investment, where he was really trying to be very extra, almost conservative on the numbers. And what he found was that it wasn't just maybe a 10% difference. In some cases, it was double the price than what was actually out there. And so he found that he actually had significantly overestimated, and just tightened up the initial investment a little bit to bring that into line there.
Yeah, that's a great point. Again, that's again why not just the franchise lawyer, but the franchise or clients should be looking at these numbers. Uh, Certainly, you have some numbers that are too high, and that can make it hard to sell.
Yeah, and one number I think often about is just on that grand opening. I think about a grand opening or initial marketing package, maybe that a franchisee has to invest in opening for an emerging franchisor, where there's an educated guess on it, but after maybe a franchisee or two or three opens, they get a sense that maybe we need to spend more or less or whatever they figure out. That's one that always I've seen other franchisors really adjust those first few years in their renewals.
Yeah, and certainly for an emerging brand, uh, there may be a lot of adjustments of the numbers more often than a franchisor that has a lot of units being that have been updated, or sorry, that have been opened recently, and they have a lot stronger connection with the numbers.
Yeah, great. Well, and I know I interrupted you there to dig into item 7 there, so I'll let you continue down with some of these other pieces that someone might need to really be thinking about when they're
Sure,
reviewing and
and
updating.
just looking through all the numbers, some again, the point should be if there's any changes, and again, franchisors want to update the terms in any way, but some of the other items to keep in mind are the trademarks being monitored. You've got to update your trademark schedule. Maybe you've filed new marks, maybe you've refreshed your logo and you filed a new application. Um, your list of franchisees. You have a item 20 charts, which include how many units were opened last year. You need to update those numbers. Um, I skipped over item 19, but that's a big one. Item 19 being the financial performance representations, which typically might be here's what our franchisees in the prior year, here's what they earned, or profit numbers, gross sales, whatever the disclosures are being. Those are a year behind. You want to make sure that you are giving franchisees, again, the most up-to-date information that you have, and it could be misleading to include 2022's numbers because you haven't updated those numbers when perhaps the system hasn't done as well over time. Maybe they've done better, in which case, again, you want to give the best numbers that you can.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And speaking of the item 19, um, when a franchisor has a certain format in terms of information shared, maybe they shared gross sales and cost of goods sold and a few other expense items or whatever it might be. Um, how does that work for the updating? Do they have to, for the when the renewal comes along, do they have to keep the format the exact same? Can they revise that? Can they change what's information is shared in the item 19?
That's a great question. And there's no requirement that the information be the exact same type as last year. Um, I typically ask my clients, what type of information do you want to give this year? There may be some reasons we can't give all of that. We may have to give more on top of what's being asked. But the point for item 19 should be keeping in mind franchisors can't tell prospects numbers unless they're in the item 19. So if throughout the year franchisors are getting questions, hey, what is this number? And it's not in the item 19, so they can't answer it. That's a good reason to think about changing the format that you had, so that you can answer those questions.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really great point. Really great point.
Um, Continuing down the line with things that are needed to be provided, updating, talked about item 20 and updating your charts with your numbers, but also providing updated lists of contact information, both for the franchisees in your system and those that have left the system over the last year. The biggest one and the one that takes the most time is audit. Um, there's a ramp up period, and first year of selling or offering franchises, the franchisor may not have audited financial statements, but as you go through time, certainly there's a requirement to have your financial statements audited by a CPA, and they are busy this time of year for many reasons. But one being is those that handle franchisor audits, all the franchisor clients are seeking to get their audits done. And that takes quite a while. So you really want to start on that process early. Again, if your audit is due, if you want to get your FDD finished by the end of April, reach out to your auditor if you haven't already done so early January. And if you've not done so this year, do it today so that you can start getting on their schedule and they can ask you for the documents that they need so that they can get that thing done in time for you to get your FDD done by the end of April.
Yeah, perfect. That sounds really great. And for that audit, maybe someone who's tuning in hasn't had to have that done yet, or they're wondering what that means. And I know you're not a CPA, but just you see these audits as you prepare and renew FDDs and such. So, can you give a general overview for someone who's wondering, well, okay, well, what is required in this? And I get this question a lot from emerging or brand new franchisors where they say, well, I haven't sold any franchises yet, or I've only sold one franchise. Do I really have to have an audit already on this for my renewal?
Well, in terms of the question whether you have to have it done, it's based on the timing of when you first started offering and selling franchises. The role and it depends on the state you're registered in. Some states, even for a brand new franchisor, wants to have some form of audited balance sheet. But for the most part, there's a 3-year ramp up period. And for your first full or partial year, you only have to have an unaudited balance sheet. Then it's an audited balance sheet, and then it's full audited financials in your 3rd year of offering and selling. And to be honest, if mere fact that you've only sold one franchise doesn't change that, because there's still some operations.
Yeah.
In terms of the types of information that go in there, as you said, I'm not a CPA. I don't know all the work behind the scenes, but they definitely include audited balance sheet, the assets and liabilities of the company, and a profit and loss statement for the prior year. So your auditor is going to want to see your books.
Yeah, that makes
And a
sense.
recommendation is to keep throughout the year, have some sort of good bookkeeping system in place, whether that's a bookkeeper, being mindful of, QuickBooks or some other technology like that, but having the information and numbers where you can easily provide that to your auditor.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense. And one question, Brad, that comes up that clients will ask me is they franchised in mid-year last year, and they got all their FDD and all their documents ready to go. And here we are in January, and the first part of the new year. They've been franchising for maybe 6 months or so. And now they're getting notifications, by the way, sessions like this, and contacted from their attorney that says, hey, by the way, it's time to update your FDD. I'll have clients say, well, what am I going to update? I haven't really done anything. And so they're just almost more curious. They're not trying to resist against it. They're just curious, say, how does this all work? So let's say someone hasn't sold any franchises yet. They're 6 months into it. What does a renewal generally look like for a client in that situation?
Well, a few different things. One, again, keeping it current. So at a minimum, you want to confirm the information. I mean, I have clients who really want to make next to no changes, but as the lawyer, I want to make sure they're rereading that FDD to make sure nothing has changed, because it's easy enough to say, hey, I want to keep things the same. There's no changes, but without actually taking the time to look and see what you said last year, it's possible somebody forgot. So making sure there really aren't any changes, minimum updating those charts in item 20, and if there is an item 19 disclosure, it can be it can be a minimal process, but it's still a process that needs to take place because you want to make sure that you're given information that complies with the law.
Absolutely. Well, and the other question that I had, that I want to kind of take down this track is to understand how this renewal process can impact franchise sales. Certainly, if there's this compliance requirement. So, how does that generally impact if you're working on one FDD for last year, you're getting the renewal, you maybe are talking to prospects in the franchise sales cycle. How does all of that, kind of interplay together with one another?
Well, it can certainly provide, it can certainly add some complexity. And ideally, you want to be thinking about, can we get some sales finished by the end of April when we have to update the FDD? What that isn't always possible, of course. And if it doesn't, then that's the sort of thing to be speaking ahead of time to your franchise lawyer. Be mindful of how is that going to affect those sales in the pipeline. Um, if a franchisor is only in non-registration states, for example, we don't have to worry about making sure the FDD is approved by, a California examiner, for example, then having the new FDD is a pretty easy process. I mean, once it's updated and approved, figure out the time we want to date it for and have it be finalized. If the franchisor is in some registration states, that can lead to situations that are referred to as going dark, meaning you have to stop once your old FDD expires. You can't have it further franchise sales efforts, and I'm using that really very generalized, until you get the new FDD signed. So I've had some circumstances where we've had franchisors we've had the FDD ready to go, maybe been really diligent. We've had the FDD ready to go early April, but knowing that we might have to stop those efforts while we have our new FDD that's being approved, we've held off on filing it until get some of those sales across the line. Again, it can be really complicated and depend on where the prospect is, but if you get close, that's the sort of thing to be talking to your franchise lawyer about, and to try to minimize those disruptions as much as possible. It's not always possible, but we should try.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Brad. And then in terms of timing on all of this, someone who comes in and, I generally recommend to our clients is get in as early as you can. Sooner is better, to get into in terms of trying to get this done in a more expeditious manner. But how long does a renewal process generally take?
Oh, it really varies. And I will say that the things that vary the most are not on my side as the lawyer, but the franchisor side, in terms of how long it's going to take to get the information together. Um, it is not helpful to wait to the last minute. But typically what happens with my franchisor clients is right around the beginning of the year, maybe the end of December, I send out an email. Hey, a reminder, we've got this April deadline. Reach out to me as soon as you can so we can start figuring out what needs to be done. Once I know I'm doing an update, I prepare a list of items that I need my franchisor clients to answer, which may be simple. Some of the items may be as simple as just confirm these are the same, that the managers and the officers, directors are the same. And it may be fill in these blanks on the state sales, or give me your franchisee list. What's your item 19 information? Um, if franchisor has easy access to that all information, it can go really quickly. But some, it takes a lot more time because I understand my franchisor clients are still running a business. So they can't just drop everything and just answer my questions.
Oh, great feedback there. And just real quick, Brad, if someone's tuning in, says, "Hey, I'd love to talk to Brad or get a little more information or reach out to his firm." How could someone get in touch with you, learn a little bit more about what you're doing?
Sure. Well, the easiest way is to go to our website, which is shipedosik.com, SHIPE DOSIK.com.
Perfect.
And you could also reach us at shipedosiklaw.com.
Great. Perfect. I put that in the chat for the folks who are with us here on the session, and then we'll also be sure to include that in the show notes when this goes live. And well, I'd love to open things up. Brad, are there other topics that you wanted to make sure you talk through here?
Yeah, just one other. We've been talking about annual updates, so to speak. Your FDD is going to go stale at a certain period, but a reminder that throughout the year, if there's what's called material changes in your FDD, you may need to make an interim or a mid-year amendment. For example, if in your current FDD lists no litigation, but sometime over the year you have some sort of litigation that's been served, or you got a new CEO. There's some other examples that would fit into material changes. If you have a lot of franchisees that have left the system, and it can depend on the state, you may have an obligation. Question, ultimately, the idea is, again, getting most current information. And if there's been a material change, something that a franchisee that might affect a franchisee's decision to make a purchase, that would be something to reach out to the franchise lawyer and say, hey, this has happened. Do we need to make a change mid-year? And you might need to. You might not.
Yeah, great info. Well, a guest or an attendee just asked, the question is that he asked is, what are your thoughts on using AI to help review the FDD and keep up with these updates?
Um, don't rely on it. AI is a fabulous tool for many things, but in my mind, at least in the legal realm, it's not better than a first draft type thought. Like, I've not used AI to review an FDD, but I would be hesitant to just simply rely on AI to make sure everything is right. It's not a perfect tool.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And as always, for someone who's tuning in, this show here is not intended, by the way, to be legal advice for you or guide you, right? This is informational purposes, and as you look to pursue and go through these updates, certainly consulting with your attorney or reaching out to Brad and his law firm or other expert franchise folks to help along the way is definitely the way to go here. Again, you can reach out to Brad at his law firm, shipedosik.com. That's Shipe Dosik Law. And do we have other questions from anyone that's joining us here on the session? All right. This looks like we're ready to close out here. Brad, is there anything else you wanted to share or get across here before we end our session?
Just not to be afraid of what you need to do. It's certainly not something that franchisors want to do, but it doesn't have to be painful.
Yeah. Great. Well, I really appreciate your time, Brad. Thanks for being here. Thank you all for joining us today. Enjoy your weekend as we finish up our last day of January already in 2025. So let's push forward into February, into the second month of the year. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you all here next week.
Take care. Thank you, Tom.